The witching hour. The silence in our house was never truly silent. That was the first thing I noticed when the insomnia started. When you are awake at 3 a.m. while the rest of the suburban world is in a coma, you learn the rhythm of your home. The refrigerator hums in a B flat. The house settles with a sound like cracking knuckles in the floorboards. The wind rattles the loose pane in the guest bedroom. My name is Mark. I'm a data archivist for a mid-sized logistics firm. My life is built on patterns, on verifying information, on ensuring that what is recorded matches reality. I am not a man given to flights of fancy or superstition. I like order. My wife, Sarah, was the opposite. She was chaotic, leaving books open spine up on the floor, forgetting to screw the cap back on the toothpaste, losing her keys 3 times a week. We had been married for 10 years, a partnership that had settled into a functional, quiet routine. We weren't the type of couple that held hands during movies or spent hours talking about our feelings. We were roommates who shared a mortgage, a tax bracket, and a grocery list. It was a dry, pragmatic arrangement that suited us both. Or so I thought. The trouble began in late October. It wasn't dramatic at first. It was just displacement. I would come downstairs in the morning to find the kitchen chairs pulled out from the table, arranged in a semicircle facing the back door. "Did you have a late-night meeting with the ghosts?" I asked Sarah one Tuesday morning, pouring my coffee. She looked up from her tablet, confused. "What? No, I slept like a rock." "The chairs," I pointed out. She glanced at them, shrugged, and went back to reading the news. "You probably did it while you were pacing. You know how restless you get." I didn't argue. 2 days later, I found the milk carton sitting on the living room mantelpiece. The milk was warm and spoiled. "Okay, this isn't funny," I told her. "The milk is sour." "Mark, I didn't touch the milk," she said, her voice sharp with morning irritation. "Maybe you're the one sleepwalking. You're the one who never sleeps." I let it drop. But the archivist in me, the part that needs data to make sense, filed it away. An anomaly. A data point that didn't fit the curve. The first time I actually saw it happen was November 3rd. I had woken up at 2:45 a.m., my mind racing about a server migration at work. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the fridge downstairs. I rolled over to check the time on the digital clock. Sarah's side of the bed was empty. The sheets were pulled back neatly, not thrown aside. I sat up. The bathroom door was open and dark. "Sarah?" No answer. I got out of bed. The floor was cold. I walked out into the hallway. The house was submerged in that thick, heavy darkness that feels like water. I found her in the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. This room was empty, used mostly for storage and Sarah's yoga mat. She was standing in the center of the room. She was wearing her gray cotton pajamas. Her arms were down at her sides, fingers straight, palms pressed against her thighs. Her posture was perfect, unnaturally perfect, rigid, like a soldier at attention. She was facing the blank white wall, her nose maybe an inch from the plaster. "Sarah?" I whispered. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. Her breathing was so shallow I couldn't hear it. I walked around to her side, careful not to touch her. I'd read somewhere, or maybe it was a myth, that you shouldn't wake a sleepwalker violently. Her eyes were open. That was the part that made my stomach turn over. Her eyes were wide open, but they weren't seeing the wall. The pupils were dilated so large that her eyes looked entirely black, swallowing the little bit of ambient light from the street lamp outside. She wasn't blinking. Her eyes were dry, glassy, and fixed on nothing. "Sarah," I said again, louder this time. I waved a hand in front of her face. Nothing. Not a twitch. Then she spoke. It wasn't a sentence. It wasn't even a word. It was a sound, a low, clicking noise from the back of her throat. Click, 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 like a Geiger counter picking up radiation. I stepped back, a primal chill running down my spine. "Sarah, go back to bed." She pivoted. She didn't turn like a person turns, shifting their weight and moving their feet. She swiveled on her heels with mechanical precision, turning 180 degrees to face me. But her eyes didn't focus on me. They looked through me, at the hallway behind my shoulder. She walked past me. Her gait was smooth, silent. She walked back to our bedroom, got into bed, pulled the covers up to her chin, and closed her eyes. Within 10 seconds, her breathing deepened into a heavy, rhythmic sleep. I stood in the hallway for an hour, my heart hammering against my ribs, unable to shake the feeling that the person who had just walked past me wasn't the woman I had lived with for a decade. The next morning, she remembered nothing. "You were standing in the guest room staring at the wall," I told her over breakfast. I tried to keep my voice casual, clinical. She laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "God, that's creepy. I must be stressed about the quarterly review. Did I say anything?" "You made a clicking noise." She frowned. "Clicking? Like with my tongue?" "No, like it was coming from your throat. It sounded dry." She rubbed her neck, looking disturbed. "Well, let's just hope it was a one-time thing. Maybe I should take some melatonin." It wasn't one-time thing. It happened the next night, and the night after that. Each time, the behavior escalated slightly. Night 2, she stood in the kitchen, staring at the microwave clock. Night 3, she was in the living room, running her hand along the spine of every book on the shelf over and over again. Touch, slide, stop. Touch, slide, stop. ... On the 4th day, I bought the cameras. I didn't tell her. This is where I know people will judge me. They'll say it was a violation of privacy. But you have to understand, I was scared, not just for her, but of her. There was a quality to her silence during these episodes that felt predatory. I needed data. I needed to know if she was just sleepwalking, or if she was having some kind of seizure, or if she was pretending. I bought 3 high-definition night vision security cameras with audio recording capabilities. I installed one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in the corner of our bedroom, hidden behind a stack of storage boxes on the high shelf of the closet. The angle covered the entire bed and the door. I set them to motion activation. That night, I pretended to sleep. I lay still, controlling my breathing, waiting. But exhaustion is a heavy tide. Around 1:30 a.m., I lost the battle and drifted off. I woke up at 6 a.m. to the alarm. Sarah was asleep beside me, looking perfectly normal. I got up, showered, dressed for work, and took my laptop to the kitchen table. I opened the security software. There were 4 notifications, 4 events recorded between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. I clicked on the first file, bedroom camera 1301, The video opened in that ghostly green scale of infrared night vision. The room was still. I saw my own form on the left side of the bed, a lump under the duvet. Sarah was on the right. At 3:13:15, Sarah's eyes snapped open. There was no grogginess, no waking up process. 1 second, she was asleep. The next, her eyes were wide open, staring straight up at the ceiling. She lay perfectly still for 30 seconds. Then, slowly, she sat up. The movement was wrong. It was too fluid. She didn't use her arms to push herself up. She just leveraged her torso upward from the waist, like a vampire in an old movie. She sat there, rigid, facing the foot of the bed. Then she turned her head slowly toward the camera. My breath hitched in my throat. The camera was hidden. It was behind boxes in the dark with no tally light. There was no way she could see it. But on the screen, Sarah stared directly into the lens. She stared into it for a full minute. Her expression was completely slack. No emotion, no recognition. Just a blank, terrifying observation. Then her mouth opened. On the video, her jaw dropped unnaturally low, stretching the skin of her cheeks. I turned up the volume on my laptop. I expected a yawn, or a groan, or maybe sleep-talking, mumbling about work. What came out of the speakers made me slam the laptop shut. It was static. White noise. It sounded like a radio tuned between stations. A harsh, hissing sh sound. I sat in the kitchen, my hands trembling. I looked at the coffee maker. I looked at the sun coming through the window. Normal things, real things. I opened the laptop again. I had to know. I skipped to the next event. Living room camera, 3:20:45 a.m. Sarah was walking in the living room. It was dark, but the night vision caught her clearly. She was walking in a perfect circle around the coffee table, round and round. Her pace never varied. Her arms didn't swing, they hung dead at her sides. She did this for 8 minutes. Then she stopped. She turned to the large window that looked out onto the backyard. She pressed her forehead against the glass. And then she spoke again. The audio on the living room camera was better. I put on my noise-canceling headphones to catch it clearly. The static was there again, underlying the voice. But this time, there were words. But the voice, it wasn't Sarah. Sarah had a slight alto voice, raspy in the mornings, melodic. The voice on the recording was flat. It sounded synthesized, or layered, like 3 people speaking at the exact same time, but in a whisper. Sector 4, the voice said. Grid align. Biological casing integrity at 80%. A pause. The static hissed. Subject dormant. Observer active. The archive is compromised. I froze. The archive. My job. I was an archivist. Observer active, the voice repeated. She knew. Whatever was controlling her body, it knew I was watching. It knew about the cameras. I watched the rest of the footage. She stood at the window for another 10 minutes, whispering numbers. Long strings of coordinates, latitude and longitude. 41.2033 north, 73.8910 west. She repeated them 3 times. Then she turned around, walked back upstairs, and the last clip showed her getting back into bed at 3:58 a.m. I deleted the footage from the cloud immediately. I didn't know why. Panic? Fear that someone else would see it? Fear that she would see it? When Sarah came down for breakfast 20 minutes later, she looked terrible, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She poured coffee and missed the cup, spilling hot liquid on the counter. "Damn it!" she hissed, wiping it up. "I feel like I got hit by a truck. Did I keep you up?" I looked at her. I looked at the woman I had lived with for 10 years. The familiar curve of her jaw, the way she tied her robe. It was Sarah. It had to be Sarah. "No," I lied. My voice sounded thin to my own ears. "You slept fine." "I have a headache," she muttered, rubbing her temples, like a buzzing, right behind my eyes. I went to work, but I didn't work. I sat in my cubicle, staring at my dual monitors, the number Sarah had whispered burning in my mind. Biological casing. That was the phrase that terrified me the most. It implied that Sarah, my wife, the woman who liked extra foam on her latte and hated horror movies, was just a container, a shell. I pulled up a mapping program on my work computer. I typed in the coordinates she had whispered. 41.203 north, 73.8910 W. It wasn't a random location. It wasn't the middle of the ocean or a city in Europe. It was 40 miles away. It was a densely wooded area off a state highway near a reservoir. According to the map data, it was an old industrial zone marked defunct, a textile mill that had burned down in the 1970s. Why would a sleepwalking woman be reciting the coordinates of a burned-down mill 40 miles away? I left work early. I told my boss I had a migraine. It wasn't entirely a lie. The stress was creating a pressure behind my eyes that mirrored what Sarah described. I drove home, but I didn't go inside. I sat in my car in the driveway, watching the house. It looked normal. A 2-story colonial with white siding and black shutters. A wreath on the door. I went inside. Sarah wasn't home yet. She worked until 5 o'clock. I went straight to the bedroom. I took the SD card out of the hidden camera. I needed to hide the evidence, but I also needed to keep recording. I set up a secondary system, an old voice-activated dictaphone I used for work notes, and taped it under the bedside table. Low tech, no Wi-Fi signals for the observer to detect. That evening was excruciatingly normal. We ordered Thai food. We watched a documentary about deep-sea exploration. "Look at those fish," Sarah said, pointing at a translucent, bioluminescent creature on the screen. "Imagine living down there in the dark. No pressure, just floating." "Yeah," I said, watching her profile. "Imagine." "Mark, are you okay?" She turned to me. "You've been staring at me all night." "Just tired," I said. "Work is brutal." She reached out and touched my hand. Her skin was cool, dry. "You should take a sleeping pill tonight. Knock yourself out." I flinched. It was a tiny reaction, but she felt it. She pulled her hand back slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Okay," she said softly. "I'm going to bed." I waited until midnight. I took a caffeine pill instead of a sleeping pill. I lay in bed, feigning sleep, listening to her breathing. At 3:13 a.m. exactly, the rhythm changed. The slow, steady inhale-exhale of sleep stopped. It was replaced by a total silence. She was holding her breath. I kept my eyes closed, peering through my eyelashes. She sat up, the same unnatural lever-like motion. She didn't look at the camera this time. She looked at me. She leaned over me. I could feel her face inches from mine. I could smell her breath. It didn't smell like toothpaste or sleep. It smelled like ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. She hovered there for what felt like an eternity. I forced my body to remain limp, forced my breathing to stay even. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to push her away, to scream. Then she whispered, right into my ear. "He is awake. The shell is rejecting the interface." She pulled back. I heard the covers rustle. Then I heard the soft pad of her bare feet on the carpet. She walked to the bedroom door. She opened it. She walked out. I counted to 10. Then I threw off the covers and grabbed my phone and the flashlight I had stashed under my pee. LOL. I followed her. I stayed a flight of stairs behind. She moved through the house with absolute confidence in the dark. She didn't turn on a single light. She went to the kitchen. I watched from the hallway shadows as she opened the back door. She didn't unlock it, because it was already unlocked. I felt a cold, sick feeling in my stomach. Had she unlocked it earlier, or had she left it unlocked yesterday? She stepped out into the backyard. The November air was freezing, easily in the low 30s. She was barefoot, wearing thin pajamas. She didn't shiver. She walked across the frost-covered grass, heading toward the detached garage. She opened the side door of the garage and disappeared inside. I ran across the lawn, the frozen grass crunching under my slippers. I reached the garage door and listened. I heard sounds, metal on metal, the clinking of tools. Then a sound that made no sense. The sound of digging. The rhythmic thud scrape of a shovel hitting dirt. The floor of our garage was concrete. I eased the door open just a crack. The garage was dark, but a single beam of moonlight from the high window cut across the space. Sarah was in the far corner, where we stored the lawnmower and bags of potting soil. But she wasn't digging in the floor. She was standing in front of the workbench. On the bench, arranged in a precise geometric pattern, were items from the house: a kitchen knife, a coil of copper wire from my toolbox, a handful of AAA batteries, and the sour carton of milk I had found days ago. She was working with her hands, twisting the copper wire around the batteries. Her movements blurringly fast. She was building something. She jammed the wire into the milk carton. Then she picked up the knife. She didn't turn around, but she stopped moving. "Access granted," she said. That same multi-layered synthesized voice. She raised the knife, not toward me, toward her own arm. "Sarah," I shouted, bursting through the door. I couldn't watch her hurt herself, no matter what this was. She spun around. The speed was impossible. 1 second she was facing the bench, the next she was facing me, the knife held low in a combat grip. Her face was illuminated by the moonlight. It wasn't blank anymore. It was contorted into a smile that was too wide, showing too many teeth. A smile that didn't reach the black, dilated voids of her eyes. "Mark," she said. But the voice wasn't synthesized anymore. It was a perfect mimicry of my own voice. It sounded exactly like me. "You are disrupting the calibration," she said in my voice. "Put the knife down," I said, holding up the flashlight like a weapon. "Sarah, wake up. You're sleepwalking." She tilted her head to the side, a bird-like, twitchy movement. "Sarah is unavailable. The vessel is occupied." She took a step toward me. I shined the flashlight directly into her eyes. She shrieked. It wasn't a human scream. It was the sound of feedback, a high-pitched electronic squeal that pierced my eardrums. She dropped the knife and clapped her hands over her eyes, stumbling back against the workbench. The copper wire contraction she had built sparked. Blue light arc between the batteries and the sour milk. She collapsed. She hit the concrete floor hard and went perfectly still. I stood there, panting, the echo of that electronic shriek ringing in my ears. I waited for her to move. I waited for the monster to get back up. But after a minute, she groaned. A normal, human groan of pain. She rolled over, blinking. Her eyes were adjusting to the light, the pupils shrinking back to normal size. She looked up at me, confusion and terror washing over her face. "Mark?" she croaked. Her voice was her own again. Why am I in the garage? Why is it so cold?" I looked at her. I looked at the strange device on the workbench. The batteries, the wire, the organic conductor of the spoiled milk. It looked like a crude antenna. "You are sleepwalking," I said. My voice trembling. She tried to stand up but winced, clutching her arm. "My arm hurts. Did I fall?" "Yes," I said. "Come on, let's get you inside." I helped her up. She leaned on me, her body heavy and warm. Human warm. She was shivering violently now, reacting to the cold like a normal person. I walked her back to the house. I made her tea. I put her back in bed. She fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted. But I didn't sleep. I went back to the garage. I took the device she had built. I took the knife, and then I went to the car. I grabbed my laptop and the GPS unit I used for hiking. It was 4:30 a.m. I typed in the coordinates again. 41.2033 north, 73.8910 west. The voice had said archive compromised. The voice had said biological casing. Sarah had built an antenna out of garbage. She had spoken in static. I couldn't stay in the house with her. Not until I knew what she was. I got in my car. I backed out of the driveway, leaving my wife sleeping in our bed. I was going to the coordinates. I was going to find out what was waiting at the burned-down mill. As I drove onto the empty highway, the radio in my car turned on by itself. I hadn't touched the dial. Static filled the car. Shh! Then the voice. The triple-layered whisper. Subject departing Sector 1. Interception required. I slammed my foot on the gas. Part 2, the archive. The voice on the radio didn't stop. It just got louder. Subject departing Sector 1. Interception required. I clawed at the volume knob, twisting it frantically to the left, but the sound didn't dampen. It wasn't coming from the speakers. It felt like the sound was vibrating directly through the chassis of the car, through the steering wheel and into my bones. Interception required. Rerouting local assets. I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. A truck, high beams on, blindingly bright. It was coming up fast. Too fast for the winding back roads. I slammed my foot onto the accelerator. My sedan engine whined in protest as I took a sharp curve at 60 miles per hour. The tires screeched, losing traction on the frost-slicked asphalt before biting back in. The truck behind me didn't slow down for the curve. It barreled through the turn with impossible precision, closing the gap. I didn't know who or what was driving it. I didn't want to know. All I knew was that the thing wearing my wife's face had called for backup. "Come on!" I screamed at the dashboard, watching the GPS unit flicker. The screen was distorting, the map tearing into pixels of green and black static. 41.2033N, 73.8910W. I had the numbers memorized. I saw the turnoff for the old textile mill road. It was barely a road anymore, just a gap in the tree line choked with weeds. I yanked the wheel to the right. The car fishtailed, gravel spraying like buckshot. I killed the headlights instantly, plunging the car into darkness, hoping to lose the pursuer. I drove blind, guided only by the faint moonlight filtering through the bare branches. I bounced over ruts and roots until the car slammed into a deep ditch. The undercarriage grinding against stone with a sickening crunch. The engine died. Silence returned. I sat there, gripping the wheel, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked in the rearview mirror. The truck paused at the top of the service road. Its high beam swept across the tree line, searching. The light passed over my car, half hidden in the ditch and brush. For an agonizing 10 seconds, the truck idled there. Then, slowly, it reversed and drove away down the main highway. It, had missed me. For now. I grabbed the flashlight, my laptop bag, and the garage door opener. Why? I don't know. Panic makes you grab strange things, and scrambled out of the car. The air here was different. It didn't smell like the forest. It smelled like wet ash and old chemicals. I checked the handheld GPS. It was still working, though the screen pulsed with a faint rhythmic interference. Distance to target, 400 yards. I began to walk. The ruins of the Blackwood textile mill rose out of the dark like the skeletal remains of a prehistoric beast. Brick walls, jagged and broken, stood silhouetted against the night sky. Rusted machinery, massive gears and looms sat rusting in the overgrowth, looking like torture devices left to rot. The coordinates didn't lead to the main factory floor. They led past the collapsed smokestack, toward the edge of the property where the river used to run before it was diverted in the 90s. The ground here was scorched. Nothing grew in a perfect 30-foot circle. No grass, no weeds, just packed. Black earth. I stood in the center of the dead circle. The GPS beeped. 0 feet. There's nothing here, I whispered, shining the light at the ground. Then I saw it. Hidden under a layer of loose shale and charred wood was a handle. Not a rusty iron ring from the 1970s, but a sleek, recessed handle made of brushed steel. It was modern. I brushed the debris away. It was a hatch about 3 feet square. There was no keyhole, no keypad. Just a flat panel next to the handle. I stared at it. I thought about the antenna Sarah, had built in the garage. The copper wire, the batteries. I pulled out my phone. It had no signal, but the NFC chip was active. I held it near the panel. Nothing. Then I remembered the voice recording. Biological casing integrity at 80%. I took off my glove. I placed my bare hand on the cold steel panel. A green light flashed across the surface of the metal. A mechanical thunk echoed from deep underground. Click, hiss. The hatch popped open, helped by hydraulic struts. A scent wafted up. It wasn't the smell of mildew or rot, which I expected from a storm cellar. It was the smell of a hospital. Antiseptic, ozone, and beneath that, the faint, sweet smell of copper. Blood. I turned on my flashlight and descended the metal ladder. The shaft went down 20 feet. I landed on a concrete floor. I was in a hallway. The walls were lined with acoustic foam, the kind used in recording studios to dampen sound. Fluorescent lights flickered on overhead as I stepped forward. Motion activated. I walked down the hall. At the end, there was a heavy door. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped into my living room. My brain stuttered. I stumbled back, grabbing the door frame. It was a perfect replica of the living room in my house, 40 miles away. The same beige sofa, the same coffee table, the same rug. Even the books on the shelf were the same titles. But it was wrong. There were no windows, just blank gray walls where the windows should be, and one entire wall, the wall that in my real house held the TV, was a bank of monitors. I walked over to the screens. They were live feeds. Is it raining? Okay, the previous user messages consisted of this text of a map app, but I will not be repeating this. Next time, she's banging on the door. Okay, third previous, next time. She was sleeping. Screen 3. A view I didn't recognize at first. It was low to the ground, black and white. Then I realized it was a view from inside the vent in the bathroom. I was being watched. I had been watched for a long time, but by who? I looked at the desk in front of the monitors. It was cluttered with papers, soldering irons, and biological samples. Petri dishes filled with a black, viscous fluid that moved sluggishly when the light hit it. I picked up a leather-bound logbook lying open on the desk. The handwriting, it was mine. I dropped the book as if it were burning. I stared at the page. The loop of the L, the sharp cross of the T, it was my handwriting, but I had never written this. I forced myself to pick it up again. I read the entry dated 3 days ago, cycle 4402. Subject mark is showing signs of resistance to the frequency. Insomnia is increasing. The dampening field is no longer sufficient to keep him in REM sleep during the maintenance windows. Suggest increasing the dosage of the hypnotic agent in the water supply. Subject mark. I read the next line. Unit 734, designation Sarah, is failing. The biological casing is degrading faster than projected. The facial muscular structure is losing elasticity, resulting in slack jaw events during recharge mode. Mark noticed the vocal synthesizer calibration error on November 3rd. We need a replacement casing soon. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I wasn't the archivist. I was the archive. I wasn't the observer finding a monster. I was the rat in the maze. Unit 734, I whispered. My wife. My Sarah. She was a unit. I flipped back through the book. Years. 10 years of entries. Year 1. Subject Mark accepted the integration of Unit 734. Emotional bond established. Serotonin levels optimal. Year 3. Subject Mark suspects infidelity due to Unit 734's absence during firmware updates. Adjusted narrative. Sarah is taking night classes. Year 5. Unit 734 sustained damage to the left arm. Repair required. Staged a car accident to explain the scarring. I remembered that accident. She had slipped on ice. She had needed stitches. I had held her hand while she cried. Was she crying? Or was her software just emulating a distress response? I threw the book across the room. It hit the fake wall with a dull thud. I needed to find the source. Who was writing this? Who had my handwriting? I saw another door in the corner of the room, marked simply storage. I walked toward it. The dread was a physical weight now, pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I gripped the flashlight like a club. I opened the door. It was a cold room, a walk-in freezer. The air was misty with condensation. Rows of metal shelves lined the walls. On the shelves were parts, jars containing eyes, trays of teeth, patches of skin stretched over frames like canvas. And in the center of the room, 3 gurneys. 2 were empty. The third was occupied. I walked toward it. The figure was covered by a plastic sheet. I reached out, my hand trembling so badly I could barely grasp the plastic. I pulled it back. It was me. It was Mark, but it wasn't alive. It was pale, waxy, and motionless. There was a Y incision stitched up the chest. The top of the skull had been sawed off and placed back on slightly askew. I stared at my own dead face. I looked at the tag on the toe. Subject, Mark Prime. Status, deceased, 2014. Cause, cardiac arrest. Notes, neural pathways uploaded to clone unit 4. I staggered back, crashing into a shelf of jars, glass shattered. Formaldehyde splashed onto the floor. Clone unit 4. I looked down at my hands. My shaking hands. I looked at a scar on my thumb, a scar I got when I was 10 years old. Whittling wood. Except, if I was a clone created in 2014, how did I have a scar from when I was 10? Memory engrams you, imploded. I wasn't real. The memories of my childhood, my parents, my high school graduation, they were real memories, but they belonged to the man on the table, the dead man. I was a copy put in a cage with a robot wife to be studied. Why? Why go to this much trouble? I heard a sound, a digital chime. I spun around. In the corner of the freezer, a computer terminal screen had lit up green. Text began to scroll across the screen. Alert, contamination in Sector 2. Subject Mark IV has breached containment. Initiating clean protocol. The lights in the freezer turned red. A siren began to wail, a low, throbbing sound that I felt in my teeth. Then the monitors in the other room changed. I ran back to the fake living room. On the screen showing my bedroom, Sarah, Unit 734, was sitting up. She wasn't looking at the camera anymore. She was looking at the door of the bedroom. She stood up. She walked to the closet. She reached up to the high shelf, the exact spot where I had hidden the gun I bought for home defense 2 years ago. A gun I had never told her about. She took the gun down. She racked the slide with a professional, fluid motion. Then she looked directly into the camera lens. She smiled, and she spoke. Not in the static voice, and not in my voice. She spoke in a voice I had never heard before. A calm, clinical, female voice. "Mark, honey," she said to the camera, knowing I was watching 40 miles away in the bunker. "You weren't supposed to see the basement. You know the rules." She raised the gun. "I'm coming to pick you up. Don't go anywhere." She shot the camera. The screen went to static. I stood in the red-lit bunker, staring at the white noise. She was coming. She knew exactly where I was, and I knew what I was. I wasn't a husband trying to save his wife. I was a lab rat that escaped its cage, and the exterminator was on the way. I looked around the room frantically. I needed a weapon. My eyes landed on the logbook again. Unit 734 is failing. Biological casing degrading. The milk, the antenna, the static. She wasn't invincible. She was breaking down. She needed recharging. I ran to the desk. I started tearing through the papers, looking for schematics, looking for a weakness. I found a blueprint labeled Unit 734 Vulnerabilities. It was a diagram of her body, or the body she wore. There was a node at the base of the skull, a receiver. "Disrupt the signal," the note said. "High-frequency feedback loop causes immediate paralysis." I looked at the equipment in the room. There was a microphone on the desk, a transmitter rack in the corner. If I could boost the signal, if I could create a feedback loop strong enough, I could shut her down. But I had to do it before she got here. "Okay, Sarah," I whispered to the empty room, my voice sounding strange to my own ears now that I knew it was a copy. Let's see who breaks first. I started hacking the transmitter. Part 3, the reset. The red emergency light bathed the bunker in the color of a developing photo. It pulsed rhythmically, a silent heartbeat of warning. I sat at the desk in the mock living room, my hands buried in the guts of the radio transmitter. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't an engineer. I was an archivist. My entire life, or the fake memories implanted in my head, was about organizing data. But data has patterns, and electronics have rules. The logbook said Unit 734, Sarah, was vulnerable to high-frequency feedback. Specifically, a localized broadcast between 18 and 20 kilohertz at high decibels. It would scramble the neural receiver at the base of her skull. It wouldn't kill the biological part, but it would crash the operating system driving it. I stripped the shielding off the coaxial cable with my teeth, tasting copper and dust. I twisted the wires onto the output node of the bunker's internal PA system. I had 40 minutes, maybe less. While I worked, the monitors on the wall mocked me. The screen showing my bedroom was dead static. She had shot it, but the kitchen camera was still active. The house was empty. The lights were off. My home. I looked down at my hands, the scar on my thumb, subject Mark IV. I squeezed my eyes shut. I couldn't think about that. If I thought about the fact that my parents' faces in my memory were just JPGs uploaded to a wet drive, I would curl up on the floor and let her shoot me. I had to be Mark. Real or not, I wanted to survive. I finished the splice. I connected the microphone to the amplifier. I turned the gain all the way up. If I flipped the toggle switch on the console, the speakers in the hallway and the hidden speakers in this fake living room would emit a shriek loud enough to rupture eardrums. For me, it would be pain. For her, it would be a lobotomy. Beep! The proximity sensor on the desk chirped. I looked at the external camera feed. A truck had pulled up to the burnt circle of earth above. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the weeds. The driver's side door opened. Sarah stepped out. She was wearing a heavy winter coat over her pajamas. She looked wrong. Even from this distance, on a grainy black and white monitor, her movement was jerky. The fluidity was gone. She walked with a hitch in her step, her head lolling slightly to the left. Biological casing degrading. She walked straight to the hidden hatch. She didn't search for it. She knew exactly where it was. She knelt down. I saw her lips move. The hatch popped open. She stared down into the shaft. Then she looked up, directly at the camera mounted on the tree line. She waved. It was a cheerful staccato wave, a puppet waving goodbye. Then she jumped. She didn't climb the ladder. She just stepped into the 20-foot drop. I heard the impact echo down the corridor, a heavy, wet thud against concrete. I grabbed the microphone stand and dragged it behind the heavy leather armchair. I positioned myself so I could reach the toggle switch on the desk, but stay out of the direct line of sight from the door. I waited. I heard footsteps in the corridor. Clump. Drag. She had broken something in the fall. A leg, maybe a hip, but she was still coming. The door to the fake living room creaked open. Mark? The voice was perfect. It was the Sarah I had married. It was the voice that had whispered, "I do." "Mark, honey, are you in here? It's freezing." I crouched lower behind the chair, my finger hovering over the switch. "I brought the car," she said, stepping into the room. "We can go home. You're having an episode, sweetie. A breakdown. It happens." Clomp, drag. She was moving toward the desk. "You're confused," she continued, her voice dripping with synthetic empathy. You think you found something scary, but this is just a workspace. It's just a basement. Come out, Mark. Let me fix you." I peeked around the edge of the chair. She was standing in the center of the room, illuminated by the pulsing red light. Her leg was bent at a sickening angle, the tibia clearly snapped, pressing against the fabric of her pajama pants. She wasn't limping. She was just dragging the broken limb like dead weight. She didn't feel pain, not really, but her face, the casing was failing. The skin on the left side of her jaw had come loose, drooping like melted wax. Beneath the tear, I didn't see bone. I saw a dull gray mesh. She was holding the gun in her right hand. It was steady. "I know you're behind the chair, Mark," she said. The tone shifted. The warmth evaporated. "Subject 4, stand down. Compliance is mandatory." She raised the gun. "What are you?" I asked. My voice shook, but I needed her closer to the speakers. She paused. She turned her head toward me, the loose skin flapping slightly. "I am the control group. You are the variable." "Did you ever love me?" I asked. "Or was that programmed too?" She smiled. The smile stretched the tear in her face wider. "Love is just a series of affirmative responses to external stimuli. In that sense, yes, I performed love perfectly." My metrics were in the 99th percentile. She took another step. "Now, stand up. We need to reset your memory engrams. It'll only hurt for a moment, like a static shock." She aimed the gun at my head. "Goodbye, Sarah," I whispered. I flipped the switch. The sound wasn't a sound. It was a physical blow. It hit the room like a bomb blast, a high-pitched, screaming frequency that felt like a needle being driven into the center of my brain. I clamped my hands over my ears and screamed, but I couldn't hear my own voice. Unit 734 didn't scream. She froze. Her arms locked to her sides. The gun fired. Bang! But the bullet went wild, shattering the mirror on the wall. She began to vibrate. It started in her hands and shot up her spine. It was a violent, blurring oscillation. Roar, she shrieked. The voice was the triple-layered synthesized demon I had heard on the tape. System failure. Sector compromised. She dropped the gun. She clawed at her own face. Her fingers dug into the skin and pulled. The sound in the room was deafening, blinding white noise. I watched in horror as she tore herself apart. She wasn't trying to stop the noise. Her programming was misfiring. Her motor functions attacked her own casing. She ripped the skin of her face away in wet, red strips. Underneath, there was no skull. There was a composite sphere of black carbon fiber and wet, pulsing biological muscle. Wires sparked and hissed as they were exposed to the air. She fell to her knees. The vibration was shaking her apart. Fluid, dark, oily, black fluid began to pour from her eyes, her nose, her mouth. "Mark." The voice distorted, dropping 2 octaves into a demonic growl. "Project continues." With a final sickening crunch, her head snapped backward. A spark exploded from the base of her neck, arcing blue electricity to the ceiling. She collapsed forward onto the rug. The vibrating stopped. I slammed the switch off. The silence that followed was heavy, ringing in my ears. I stayed behind the chair for a full minute, gasping for air, waiting for her to move. She didn't. Unit 734 was offline. I stood up slowly. My nose was bleeding from the pressure of the sound. I walked over to the body. It looked like a pile of rags and meat. The black fluid was pooling on the carpet, soaking into the fibers. I kicked the gun away from her hand. I looked at the monitors. The red light was still pulsing. Alert, signal lost. Deploying cleanup crew, ETA 15 minutes. Cleanup crew. I didn't have time to process the horror of what lay on the floor. I grabbed the logbook. I grabbed the hard drive from the computer. I grabbed the gun. I ran. I scrambled up the ladder, my muscles burning. I crawled out of the hatch and into the cold night air. The truck she had driven was still running, the headlights cutting through the mist. I got in. It smelled like her perfume, vanilla and lavender. It made me want to vomit. I threw the truck into reverse and tore out of the clearing, bouncing onto the main road just as I saw lights appearing in the distance, blue and red flashing lights. Police? Or something pretending to be police. I didn't wait to find out. I drove for 3 hours. I didn't take the highway. I stuck to back roads, driving north, always north. When the sun began to rise, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, I pulled into a rest stop in Vermont. I turned off the engine. My hands were still shaking. I opened the logbook on the passenger seat. I needed to know. I needed to know if there was a way out. I flipped to the last page. It was a map. A map of the United States. But the state lines weren't drawn. Instead, the country was divided into grid squares. My town was labeled Sector 4. I looked at where I was now, Vermont. It was labeled Sector 5. And written in the margins, in that familiar handwriting, my handwriting, was a note. Note for future iterations. If you are reading this, you have breached the containment of Sector 4. Do not assume you are safe. The experiment is not regional. It is global. You are a mark. There are thousands of us. We are the variables. They are the control. Trust no one. Sleep with one eye open, and never, ever listen to the static. I closed the book. I looked out the windshield at the rest stop. A family was walking toward the building. A father, a mother, and a little girl. The father looked tired. He was rubbing his temples, as if he had a headache behind his eyes. The mother was smiling. She walked with a smooth, perfect gait. She looked at me as they passed my truck. Her eyes were blue, bright, piercing blue. She didn't blink. She smiled at me, a wide, perfect smile. And then she tapped her ear, as if adjusting an earpiece. I didn't wait. I started the truck and slammed on the gas, merging back onto the highway. I turned on the radio, desperate for music, for news, for human voices, but every station was the same. Shh. Sound? And then a voice. My voice. Subject 4 has entered Sector 5. Initiate observation protocol. Activate Unit 890. I looked in the rearview mirror. My eyes, my own eyes. They looked tired. I kept driving. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know if there is anywhere to go. But I know one thing. I'm awake now. And I am never going to sleep again.